What's up, guys? Justin here for Team Shenanigans, and I want to apologize for the lack of Vanguard content here lately. Vanguard's just kind of in a stale place right now. It's gotten a little boring and monotonous with the meta. But once set 11 and 12 both come out, it'll get a little better. And we do have some Bermuda deck profiles coming because Chrissy's just perfecting her builds for like Pacifica and Loris and such. I think Reindeer also. But we'll have some deck profiles of those coming up. But I realized I haven't done a updated deck profile on what my Luard build looks like right now. It's a little different from, you have your standard Luard Diablo builds that you see around. Some people play pure Luard. I feel like my build's just a little different. I know this is Vanguard, so there's not necessarily, if you're staying meta, there's not that much difference you can have in a deck. Luard's a little, you can get kind of techie with the grade 1s and mess with your ratios a little bit because it's Luard and you have the consistent late game that you have with just the fact that you're running Luard. So, let's go ahead and dive into the deck profile. Of course, I run 4 copies of Dragheart Luard. He's the engine of the deck. Free strides are great, and the on-stride skill of Counterblast 1, retire something, call 2 grade 1s or lower from the deck. So you can, of course, call your Owl, your Stand Trigger, your starter David if you put it back. So that's really nice. You can even, I wouldn't recommend it, but you can call out an Ezra's and then retire it with a skill just to get 2 Ezra's and drop to start looping them on the next turn. You can do that. You can call Swordbreaker as long as you're managing your soul and you're not going to need it for like an Orgeyser play or a Spectral play later on. So you have to be careful of that. But you pretty much know what Luard does. Amazing card, one of the best grade 3s in the game. And next we'll run 1 copy of Luard Diablo, just because if you can't ride Luard, it's the next best thing to ride. Don't get me wrong. Usually if you're forced into riding him, you're going to lose. Unless you can just sack your opponent with striding Diablo over him and sacking something and then they can't guard. That's your only out to that, really. Because, to be honest, if you don't ride Luard, your Abyssal Owls don't work, I believe your Ezra's don't work, your Belial Owl doesn't work, and you're just going to have a bad time. And you're not plussing at all. Speaking of plussing, the next grade 3, I run 2 copies of Folda. I only run it at 2. I considered running it at 3, but I absolutely do not want to have to ride it. So, she's mainly for your really bad matchups with like Narukami and Kagero. If they field wipe you, you can just call this to the board and counterblast 1 to get your Belial Owls, or 1 Belial Owl and 1 Azir, or even David out of the deck. You just, for 1 counterblast, when it's placed on Vanguard or Rearguard, search the deck for 2 grade 0s and call them. So it's a nice card, and the tech ability of it, just for those bad matchups, like I said. It can even help in the Link Joker matchup if you're going up against CBD and they Soul Blast to get rid of your board after it unlocks and then draw cards. So it has its place in the deck, and you can run 3 to 4 of it if you want, but I just prefer the 1 Luard Diablo just as that extra ride target. Because while riding him sucks, riding this, you just might as well go ahead and scoop, because game over. Next, getting in the grade 2s, I actually run 12 instead of my standard 11 I normally run. For Morfessa, of course, it's a 14k beater, on hit, counterblast 1, call a grade 1 from the deck, so that's nice. And counts as a grade 1 and drop at GB1, so that's nice. So it helps fuel Ritual. I normally will call this early if I have an extra one and I know I'm not having to save it in hand to end up having to pitch 2 cards to stride for my first stride. Because even if the opponent kills it, then it just counting as an extra grade 1 in my drop, and I can always put it back later. So Orfess is very good, makes those power columns. Next is probably the MVP, grade 2 of the deck, Hoel. This is, I still feel like until we get more ritual cards, which there's currently revealing out of set 12, there's a really good new grade 2 they just revealed. But until we get a good soul charging and counter charging engine, I feel like the Diablo engine with Hoel and Kaiden is just way too good to not play. If you're on a Diablo Vanguard, so if you stride into either of your Diablo strides, and this is on rear guard, every time you call a grade 1 that turn, give this power plus 3 and your Vanguard power plus 3 for each grade 1 called. From deck, from hand, it doesn't matter. And if you call a Kaiden, you get the Soul Charge 1, Counter Charge 1. So that's really nice. 4 copies of him. And you want to have him on the board prior to your Diablo Stride turns to use his effect the right way, to call those Kaidens out from deck with Luard skill. Mainly, it is nice to countercharge, but what you find yourself really needing usually is the soul. Because if you can keep a Hoel on field and keep cycling like a Kaiden and a Swordbreaker back, you can keep calling the Kaiden and the Swordbreaker back out of deck, reimbursing yourself for the Swordbreaker's Soul Blast cost, and just drawing extra cards. So it's really nice. Next, 4 copies of the 10k vanilla. This deck has to get to late game. It's really easy for decks to rush you down if you don't draw well. Luard has a weak early game, a really weak early game. You just have to hope you draw into, if they're going to rush you and they draw a good hand to rush you, you just have to hope you draw into this guy to ride it. That's why I run 4 copies. Keep those 9k pokes from happening. Next, grade 1s, 4 copies of Ezra's. It's a very good PG. Just Ritual 3, GB 1. If there's another copy of this in your drop zone, you select this card, and then put another copy of it from the drop zone on the bottom of the deck, and retire 1 rearguard on your field, and add this card to your hand. So you have to have 2 in the drop, but it's just a +1 if you call Bilal out from hand, so it's really nice. And you can just keep looping them and drawing them out with Orgeyser and Swordbreaker and your triple drives and all that fun stuff. It's just really nice. And it's your answer to the turtling matchups of like Link Joker when they're just pounding your face in and locking your field. Especially against Messiahs, you're going to really need that PG because almost every Vanguard swing they're swinging at you with is with an extra crit. Next, 3 copies of Abyssal Owl. This is besides Kaiden, it's your main countercharge engine. Whenever it's retired, if you have a Luard Vanguard, you can countercharge 1 if it's retired for the cost of your Vanguard skill. And also, if it's placed on rearguard from hand, search the top 7 for Luard, add it to your hand, discard cards that equal grade 3. Everybody knows what that is. Next, Kaiden. I already explained him for the most part, going with Hoel. His other skill is whenever he's retired, you can choose your Diablo Vanguard and give it power +5. So, and of course, there's the whole countercharging, blah 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 blah. Next, 2 stride enablers. Yes, Luard strides for free, but I only run 7 grade 3s, and unless you G-guard first, unless you ride grade 3 first and then G-guard on your opponent's turn, you're not going to be able to use Luard's Ritual for your first stride, which is it's very important that you don't want to have to pitch a bunch of cards early to stride first. Well, for your first stride, I mean. So stride enablers are still a necessary evil in this. I really wish they weren't. It'd be nice to run different grade 1s, but it's kind of needed. Next, 2 Swordbreaker. I keep considering taking this down to 1, but I can't tell you how many times I end up having to ride it, or I damage it as like my first or second damage early game, and that really sucks. Because unless you heal it off, you can't put it back and get those extra draws when you need them. You don't always need the extra draws with this build, but because you can say Swordbreaker. A lot of people say Swordbreaker is not really needed anymore because Belial exists. But if I have a Swordbreaker and I can afford the soul early game, I would rather call it the Swordbreaker than the Belial. Because yes, you can put the Belials back in deck, but you're taking a crit out of your deck every time you do that. And late game, when you're putting them back, I understand like cycling them out, drawing cards, and then putting them back to crit your opponent late game when the deck's really thinned out. But I really like doing Swordbreaker instead. It still gets you the exact same thing that Belial gets you, but it leaves that crit in deck just at the cost of a Soul Blast. Next, everybody's favorite card, the crit that just everybody loves to hate, Belial. If you have a Luard Vanguard, this card is retired for the effect of something or cost of something. You draw a card. And then at the end of your turn, Ritual 3, you may put this card to the bottom of your deck. So it's recycling triggers, and it's basically between this and the stand, which is why I run this stand, you're just putting triggers back in the deck constantly. I like to use Belial, not necessarily calling it out if I don't have to, but I use it to get if I draw into it. Next, just 4 vanilla crits, just Undead Angel because it's foil and it's my favorite Revenger crit trigger art. Next, 4 copies of this awesome stand guy, Mage of the Rogue Eye Arzur. I always forget his name. He basically is just a David that's 4k power instead of 5. At GB1, he counts as 2 retires when you're retiring for the effect of something or cost of something. And whenever he's placed in the drop zone by the effect of, paying the cost for something, he just goes back to the deck and you shuffle the deck. So between this guy and the Belial, you're constantly putting the triggers back in your deck while pulling out grade 1s, and just really nice. Really helps you sack your opponent late game, which is what Vanguard's all about. Next, just 4 heals. Doesn't matter what heal you play. As long as you play 4 heals to hopefully heal out, get that godly 6 damage heal, and G-Guards are important. Next, my starter's David. I know I run Arzur that counts as 2 retires, but I still really like David right now as the starter for this deck, because I don't like paying the counterblast for any of the others, and I absolutely hate the 4k Revenger starter that you move to soul, discard a card. You have to discard a normal unit, and then you look at the top 2 or you look at the top card, put on top or bottom, and then you draw a card or something like that. I hate it because it's 4k power and it's just useless early game. Absolutely useless early game, and it's not netting you anything but a soul. While the trial deck one I used to play was nice, but the counterblast got too expensive, and I've even tested out Dark Goat, but again, the 4k power, and it costs a counterblast, which is expensive. So overall, David just nets you more. Since it's a 5k booster, you can keep putting it back into deck with Luard, so you don't necessarily have to pull your stand out of deck to get something that counts as 2 retires. And it's just really nice. The only downside is it doesn't go to soul for anything, but that's why you run Kaiden and Hoel to get those extra soul charges. And if you're not seeing this engine, then you just don't use Swordbreaker, you pull Belial out instead. Belial out instead. I can't talk. So anyway, that's the main deck. I'm just going to go straight into the G-Zone. Alright guys, getting into the G-Zone. First of all, 4 copies of Dark Dragon Diablo. Is your Guard Restrict, your CB1 for 10k power and a crit. Your opponent, if you retire 3 and your opponent doesn't retire 2 or can't retire 2, they can't call cards from the hand to Guardian Circle. Still G-Guard and all that good stuff, but it's still very much a necessary evil in this deck. Can really help you cheese an opponent out of a win. Next, 2 copies of Spectral Diablo. This is really only at 2 in this deck for for the Link Joker matchup. I really never have to go into it a second time against any other deck. I know a lot of people only run one, but I understand Luard can turtle and survive through Link Joker potentially if you get your Ezra's loop going and everything. But this really helps the matchup still, so I still like running 2. You just have to really manage your soul. If you're going up against Link Joker, don't use your sword breakers unless you have your Hoels and your Kaidens to reimburse your soul so you can go into this guy's second time. You really don't want to be in a situation where you need to go into him and you don't have the soul. I've made that mistake and I've learned from it. Next, 1 copy of Doomed and 3 Orgeizers. I kind of really want to run 2 Doomed and 2 Orgeizer, but I really don't want to pay for the second Doomed because he's expensive as hell right now. The only instance where Orgeizer is better than Doomed is probably like in the Grand Blue matchup where they don't care about their rear guards. And I do like the fact that Orgeizer is on attack, so you don't have to refill up your board. So it feels like you're kind of getting more in that way. But the fact it does cost a Soul Blast kind of sucks. But Doomed is usually what I go into as my first stride. Just to get a couple, hopefully 1 or 2 retires off their board and reimburse. You still reimburse yourself for the retires. It just costs 3 instead of the 2 that Orgeizer gives you. Or costs. But that's not a problem at all since you run David and the stand trigger that counts as 2, and you always have Belial's also. So that's not a problem at all. 1 copy of Carnivore Dragon. This is really good if, as a first stride, if you stride first and your opponent's first stride really relies on their starter doing something for them, and it's really going to hinder them if they don't have their starter and they didn't call anything else early or only called 1 other card. You go into this guy, retire 1 of your cards, and they lose both their cards. And if they only have their starter or a grade 1 or a grade 2 that they really need on board and don't have anything else, then they still have to retire it and you give +4 to your front row. So that's really nice. Next, not a lot of people play this. It's, I don't really know how to pronounce it. Dark Dragon, Animus Pile Dragon. I think Animus, yeah. It's basically, I really like this card because it's basically a Blizza that you don't have to pay anything for. It just gets power plus 5k for each grade 1 in your drop zone as long as you're at Ritual 3. So it's a guaranteed plus 15k at least. So, and I've strode into him late game just because I didn't have any counter blasts or any soul blasts, so I'm just, oh, let's go into this guy. And he swung for just huge numbers. And if your opponent doesn't have a PG or any G guards to really help them out, even if they have a G guard, they're still going to have a hard time blocking it. So late game is a really good card. That's the only reason it's in there. It's just a 1 of that doesn't take up much space. And I can't think of anything else I'd rather play. I mean, what else are you going to play in this? Drag drivers? Pfft, nope. Of course, the G zone is really going to change when set 12 comes out and we finally know whenever we finally know what the new Luard Stride does. Hopefully it's a million times better than Drag Driver, because that card is just awful. Next, G-Guards, 2 Plot Maker, 1 Drop and Draw, just to help fuel Ritual early game. And this has helped me fish out Stride Fodder. Like if, after I grade 3 first, then my opponent strides first, and I know I'm not going to be able to stride on the next turn. I don't have Ritual, and I don't have a 3 or Stride Enabler in hand or anything. I've G-guarded with this and top decked into a Stride Fodder, and it was just the most amazing feeling ever. But besides that very situational situation, it can really help fuel Ritual if you need that extra grade 1 and drop. And 1 Dismal. Dismal's honestly not very useful, and you could replace it with another Plot Maker if you needed to, or another Drop and Draw. I only still run it in this build solely because of Hoel. If you really need to go off with Hoel and need that counter charging and soul charging on the next turn, because you're going to go into a Diablo stride, you can just G-guard with Dismal and Hoel. They just can't touch your Hoel that turn. So, but that's the deck, guys. It's updated a little bit, of course, and once set 12 comes out, I'm going to do another deck profile. We're going to have more Vanguard content coming towards y'all and a lot more buddy fight content, because we've got quite a few new buddy fight decks and everything, and we're starting to get ready for regionals coming up in October. Yeah, October, I think. But appreciate you watching. Thanks, and remember to like and subscribe if you haven't, and stay tuned for more buddy fight and Vanguard content. Thanks, guys.